Hi everybody, this is Joanna and Chris and I today are at Cahokia Mounds. The reason I'm going to do this short introduction is because we never planned on coming to Cahokia Mounds when we were here making our way from the East Coast to Arizona. But some interesting things happened that kind of led us here, and we think there's a little bit of a story to tell. So let me first tell you that we would definitely tell people to come visit Cahokia Mounds, which is in southern Illinois. And let me just read this to you. Cahokia Mounds, as the largest prehistoric Indian site north of Mexico, Cahokia Mounds covered about 4,000 acres and included at least 120 mounds. The state of Illinois now protects 2,200 acres of the central portion of the site and 70 of the 80 remaining mounds. The site was named a U.S. National Historic Landmark in 1965, and in 1982, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization designated Cahokia Mounds as a World Heritage Site for its significance in the prehistory of North America. So I didn't know that at all. Didn't even know that it existed. But again, one of the things to tell you about Cahokia Mounds is that the name Cahokia comes from a little bit later in time frame. They think this started in about 700 or so AD. That's what they're saying. It was much later that the Cahokia Indians lived in the area, and that's why this is called Cahokia Mounds. They do not know that the Indians were Cahokian. But anyway, this is very, very old site. Again, they are saying around 700 AD that this maybe first started. And again, there are some impressive mounds like there are in Mexico. What I wanted to do before we start talking to this is just tell you that this is what happens to Chris and I all the time. We don't intend necessarily to go someplace, but things start to happen to us which lead us here, and then we find more of a story. So Cahokia Mounds was no different. We were in the surrounding Chicago area of Illinois, and we both started to have interesting things happen. I was having visions of things that I did not understand. I was having visions of being almost kind of in a pit, let's say, looking up and seeing basically a dome being placed, and people were in there, like a dome was being placed over top of people that were in something. And I also witnessed a harvest, unfortunately. I was witnessing some underground caverns and different things that I did not understand. Chris was tuning into different things, and we just decided, well, maybe we should look for something around the area like ancient burial grounds. So literally, I went and I looked up ancient burial grounds, and of course, one of the first things to pop up here was Cahokia Mounds. So as the day progressed, more information was coming out. Chris was tuning into certain things, and so we then just this morning took the tour that was given by a wonderful young man who gave a wonderful tour about his knowledge, and some of the things that he said unbelievably jived with some of the visions and things that we were having, and that was actually kind of amazing. So we want to share with you our some of our understandings and theories. They don't know a lot about what happened to Cahokia Mounds. They do not understand the demise. They do not know certain things and can't explain them. So we offer some theories of our own based on our understanding of histories that people do not know about, that seem to jive, and we're going to talk about them with you today to offer our theories on what may have happened in Cahokia Mound. So with that, we're going to show you around the area. On this video, you're going to see a lot of pictures and different things that we'll show you, and then Chris is going to offer some channelings as well. So we invite you to listen to our story about Cahokia Mounds.
If only we could go back in time, we might unravel the mystery of this place. How it was planned, how it was built, what it meant to its people. Now we can see only hints of all that was Cahokia. A huge mound, the largest earthen monument in the Americas, and a vast series of smaller mounds arranged in patterns across the largest archaeological site north of Mexico. There is no other place like Cahokia. We're still learning its secrets, and they point to a far-reaching enterprise, to a people who had a vision for what they would build, and to a city like no other in its time. The valley was rich, naturally abundant. Its fertile soil, laid down by the continent's mightiest river, was hospitable to a vast range of plant species. The river, its floodplain, and the nearby bluffs provided several different habitats for a wide variety of animals. It also became a habitat for human beings who migrated into the area over 12,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, the people here evolved into a culture we call Mississippian. These were the men and women who built the mounds. Like earlier people, they grew squash, sunflowers, and other seed-bearing crops. Wild plants, fish, and other animals were also important food, but the fuel for their great enterprise was agriculture. When Mississippian communities started growing corn, for example, they could produce more food than they needed, a surplus. Corn grew well here. Crop yields were high. Because corn could be stored for long periods, some could be saved for years when crops were poor. With a steady food supply, great numbers of people could make Cahokia their permanent home. Mississippians could also exchange surplus crops for meat, tools, clothing, or other items. This meant some people didn't have to farm. They could specialize in other activities, such as tool making. So corn and other crops became more than food. They fueled a whole society. The leader might demand a share of corn to use for a variety of purposes. His emissaries might trade their community's surplus for rare and exotic goods, such as copper or seashells. Mississippian communities traded in this way over a network that spanned thousands of miles, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ozarks. All of these communities were part of the Mississippian tradition. The larger ones built massive, flat-topped mounds, huge platforms of earth where temples or other buildings were erected. In the American Bottom region, where the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers converge, there was an even more closely linked network. Small communities, some consisting of just a few houses planted at the edge of a cornfield, were linked to larger villages, which were themselves linked to still larger communities, some with thousands of residents. At the center of them all was Cahokia. Cahokia, the great mounds, the vast ceremonial plazas, houses as far as the eye could see. Cahokia. It was the seat of power, of vitality, of wealth, of security. It prevailed for several hundred years. Cahokia. Its many parts were sited with great and deliberate precision. Each area had a function. There were enormous plazas for games, ceremonies, and great gatherings. There were miles of stockade wall protecting the central ceremonial area. There was a unique sun calendar that we call Woodhenge. There were fields of corn and other crops vast enough to feed up to 20,000 inhabitants and produce a surplus. There were immense pits, and from these earth for the mounds was dug. There were ridge-top mounds marking the city's boundaries. There were flat-top mounds where buildings stood, and there were conical burial mounds. And there was one mound, greater than all the others, greater than any other structure in the whole Mississippian world. This great platform of earth was at the center of the community. It was the highest point and the home of the chief. From here, he ruled the earth and spoke to the sky. His wealth was immeasurable, his wisdom profound, his authority unquestionable. The chief was responsible for maintaining balance between the spiritual forces of the upper world and the lower world. And perhaps even more challenging, he was responsible for maintaining order and harmony among the people. Service rendered to him was as to the gods. With his wisest advisors, the chief directed construction of the great mound, the site of his temple. For the thousands of laborers, building the mound was an act of loyalty and of faith. Building it in stages, they dug the earth with stone hoes and carried it on their backs in woven baskets, 50 to 60 pounds at a time, 15 million times over a 300-year period. They watched the great mound as it grew, and they were proud. Cahokia was a busy place, bustling with human energy. The people made and used tools and other objects. They obtained and prepared food. They built houses and other structures. They struggled with all the byproducts of urban life, such as crowding, garbage, crime. They raised children, nursed their sick, and buried their dead. As Cahokia grew in population, it also grew in complexity. A single-family group, which in an earlier time would have been able to provide for all its own needs, now had to trade and work with other clans and families to survive. Much as in our own society, relationships extended beyond the family to weave a web of interdependence within the community. For the people of Cahokia, each day was a challenge to the body, to the mind, and to the spirit. Like human beings everywhere and in every era, Mississippian people used their myths and beliefs to help them understand their world, its seen and unseen aspects, its known and unknown nature. We find clues to their beliefs in the rituals they performed and in the symbols they used. A seed is buried, like a friend who has passed away, and from it grows a new plant which ripens and is harvested so that the seed may be planted again. Death follows life, and life follows death. It is a cycle never ending. Or consider the snake that lives under the earth and can be seen to emerge from its old dead skin wearing a fresh new one. Or witness the sun, the giver of fire and life, advancing across the heavens in a perfect, predictable arc. Use it to chart the seasons. Use it to mark the moment when day and night are equal. Use it to measure the cycles of life. Today, we look back at Cahokia with boundless curiosity. Every day, new scientific techniques, new technologies, and new ideas help us to understand the culture that ruled this valley for hundreds of years. But there are still many mysteries to unravel and many discoveries to be made. For example, no one knows exactly why Cahokia began to decline sometime late in the 13th or early in the 14th century. We know the end came slowly, over many years, as Cahokia's authority and power were challenged. We know poor nutrition and disease were growing problems. Maybe changes in climate, dwindling resources, and a growing population. Or perhaps class warfare, conflicts within the group or from the outside also contributed to the decline. These mysteries endure, and they challenge us to think harder, to reach back with the power of imagination to a time long ago when embers, fed by the sacred fire, glowed and smoldered through the night.
In those days the earth was bountiful, and my people were many, and many fires warmed us. We planted maize and prayed for blessings from the rain and the sun.
We traveled far and returned with many fine things. We saw fine houses and great temples.
But wherever we walked, we sang proud songs about the greatness of our home, because none we saw throughout the land could match the splendor and the majesty of this place.
This place, where the maize grows tallest, where the runners are most swift, where the builders reach the sky, and where the noble sun shines most brightly.
Hi everyone. We hope you enjoyed the film that the Cahokia Mounds people, the historians and archaeologists put together on their understanding of the Cahokia Mounds. We thought it was a nice presentation that they had done, so we wanted to include it in this conversation. But now we're going to tell you a little bit about our experience here, and it was quite interesting indeed. So I'm going to first start off by explaining that what we did when we first got here wasn't see this movie, but we literally got there just in time to do a walking tour. And we had a wonderful history major who was working with the facility, Jason, take us around and explain his understanding and some of the archaeological discoveries, and then some of the theories and thoughts that they had based on those discoveries. And it was quite interesting indeed.
Actually, his name was Justin.
Oh, his name was Justin.
Justin.
Sorry, his name was Justin. And he was wonderful, and we really thoroughly, and I say this sincerely, we thoroughly enjoyed walking around with him. It was really, really nice. So we would encourage anyone, if you go to Cahokia Mounds, to look up in advance when they do walking tours, and we would tell you to take one. It's very, very interesting to listen to. So anyway, what he was doing was pointing out the different mounds, and not all mounds are created equal. There was the one we refer to as Monk's Mound, that is the highest one, but they were actually different shapes of mounds. And some of the mounds were kind of what they call platform shapes, meaning they may have gone up, but there's kind of a flat rectangular surface on the top. They thought a lot of times in these that a house was put on top of those mounds. There were mounds that were more round and cylindrical, and they thought that maybe some of those could have been burial grounds, type of mounds that they used for burials. And they had things that they called ridge top as well, that maybe they thought were burial mounds, and we were going through some of them in the area and having some discussion. As we were doing our walking tour, there were pointed out one very specific mound, and that was mound number 72. Now, at the time of the walking tour, we did not go up to mound 72. It was kind of pointed to and spoken about. And basically, what I'm going to read to you right now is what is in the brochure about Mound 72. It says, excavations into small ridgetop mound revealed nearly 300 ceremonial burials, mostly of young women in mass graves. An elite male, about 45 years old, was laid on a platform of 20,000 marine shell disc beads formed in a shape of a raptor bird. Nearby, 2 other burials and a large cache of grave offerings. 3 small mounds covered these burial groupings. Then a final cap of soil joined 3 to form the Ridgemont Mound. And so what the young man had explained to us in general is they thought that this type of mound, and then maybe even some of the rounder mounds, were used as burial sites, and that in this particular instance, the mound itself was solid. There were people found underneath, and I think he meant people around it as well as a part of their burial practices. Now, what was interesting to me personally at the moment that he said it was the fact that he said with this group of women in the mass grave that he said they all seemed to have died at the same time, which was very interesting to me indeed, because of the vision sequence that I had had of basically being put into a mound where I was being able to look up. But what was interesting as far as the mound that I was looking at is that it looked like it was being domed over and created into a dome. Like these people were alive when this dome was created and they were left in this mound. So That was very interesting to hear him say that a mound had such a thing in it, with a bunch of people who appeared to have died at the same time. And then one of the other things that he said was very interesting that they also found at the mound, and this was not written on the brochure, basically was that they also found 4 bodies that were there, and they had interlocking arms. But what was interesting is that they had no heads and they had no hands. And so I had my first initial thoughts on what that was all about, and we'll talk about that more in just a second. But that was a very interesting as well. And he again mentioned, kind of his ceremonial burials and stuff. So we spoke a little bit more about different things, and then the walking tour was over. Chris and I then went inside, saw the film you just saw, and then actually went through their excavations and things that they had found and different discussions. It's a wonderful place to visit. They've done a beautiful job. I can't say that enough. Once we were done with that, we decided to kind of do our own little walk around. Now, when the tour guide was with us, one of the things that was interesting, you said, was that there were giants all around. So when we were doing the tour with the tour guide, giants all around. We'd go inside, we'd look at a few things, we'd come back out, not a giant to be seen. It's like they've all gone, and here Chris wanted to do some channeling. So we decided, well, we're going to keep walking. We'll go down to that. We wanted to go down to Mounds 72 anyway. We were feeling very strongly we needed to go there. And as we were going, then things got a little bit crazy, because all of a sudden, Chris realized what was around and coming in to focus was a lot of spheres. And that the spheres basically were coming in, and thus we figured that is why the giants had left. So it's getting uncomfortable because the spheres are around. They're getting a little bit irritating. And we continue to walk down the area. What becomes really interesting as well is that at the same time, especially when we took the turn to go down to Mound 72, that all of a sudden it was like we were being a little bombarded with butterflies. And they were flying around us, but flying into our face. And, we were keeping walking, and then I think both of us interpreted the same thing, that they actually did not want us going down there. Like, I think it was a warning. Don't go, don't go. But we were going to go anyway, and we kept going. So we also decided at that time that we needed to go ahead and do what we normally do, which was to declare the grounds neutral, and to say the law of one, and to ask Helios to come in to please help us with the spheres that were around. We do that now when we see that, because Helios said he wanted us to. That he, instead of having you try and handle them, that you needed to call in reinforcements. And the two beings that said that we should call on them the most when we need some help with this were Helios and the Earth Mother herself, because I think they are both done with it. And so just remember that, guys out there who does this kind of work, call in Helios and the Earth Mother if you need some assistance, and they will hopefully be there for you as they've been there for us. So Helios started what he normally does. He started clearing the place, and it actually took quite a while. When we went down, and we actually went to basically where the historical marker is, which is a very big sign with all information, and we got there, then we knew what we needed to see, because what was actually said is that this was a sacrificial mound. And so the person who was talking about it called it a ceremonial mound. This calls it a ceremonial mound. But as you see, as we're showing probably pictures now of this, what was on the marker, this was a sacrificial mound. These women were all killed basically at the same time, and they even showing what you're going to see now are the pictures of the 4 that were buried together with no hands and no heads. And so when you hear this first channeling that's coming up, that's going to be spoken about as well. So I'm not going to tell you much, but there's definitely a big story there that you'll be hearing in a second. And also, the spheres were still around, but what was interesting again is that we really had the butterflies around us. This time they would fly around us. They would just fly around and then fly around and then fly around. And we realized what was really wonderful is that nature itself, the nature entities were there actually protecting us at the moment so that we could collect this information. So it was really an amazing thing. So what I want you to understand, and when they talk about in the channeling about the ones, especially the males there, is that the one thing that is interesting about Cahokia and the whole place there is that it is more ancient than some of the other similar Indian mound building societies in different parts of the world, in Mexico and different things. So Cahokia was one of those places. And it really started out, from our understanding, as a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And what ended up happening, basically, from speaking with the giants and everything, is that they were a part of that society. So when Chris was seeing the giants earlier, you saw about 1,000, you said, but they were a part of that society, and they all got along very well together, and as in the channeling, basically consulted and helped. The bad news is that when the darkness came in, as we've said before, there was a time in history where the darkness really came in and became institutionalized. When it came in, coming in with the Draco, coming in with the sphere beings and things like that, they really wanted to then dictate, dominate, control, and dictate what was going on. They needed draconians, humans, as an energy source, as well as just meat to eat. And again, the spheres needed energy, and they were going to get it. So one of the things, unfortunately, that happened throughout history was when that occurred, they wanted sacrifice. And what happened at Cahokia was very, very interesting. The people there of Cahokia did not agree. And so one of the things when talking with the giants and different ones that we found out is they fought back. And in fighting back, one of the evidence pieces of them fighting back is of those 4 male individuals. And from what they said and from what you knew, the reason they were, beheaded basically is because of the fact that they knew how to, finally learned how to kill one. And although their skeletons are humans, I think
they're hybrids.
They were that you ascertained that they were hybrids, so that's the evidence that they decided to not agree, and in fact that these 4 were in the society as the priests. And so they were, the priests of the area. They had their following. They decided they would start this practice. And the society decided absolutely not, that they were not going to do this. They were not this type of people. Now, believe it or not, I think in the channeling you're going to hear that the giants were trying to explain who they were dealing with and did not agree with fighting. That fighting would not be the answer. Unfortunately, the Cahokia Indians, I shouldn't say the Cahokia Indians, the people of the Cahokia Mound, that they decided against an alternative method and decided they were going to fight. And so what ended up happening, one of the interesting things about, again, Cahokia Mounds and sometimes in some of these other places, is they seem to be gone and they're not quite sure what happened to them. And the thing that we understand that happened at Cahokia is that the people there decided that they were not going to do sacrifice. They fought back. And what ended up happening is that the spheres came in and they harvested. And so that's why they don't know what actually happened to them, because they kind of disappeared quickly, and that's what happens in an instance like this. So why is this important? Because Cahokia was one of the oldest places. When it went around the world, what happened to Cahokia, it set the stage that other civilizations that came up participated in ritual sacrifices. They decided they better sacrifice people rather than lose the whole society. So Cahokia was remembered as a place of what will happen to you if you do not honor those gods. And so the interesting thing about Cahokia as well is that the Cabal know all about what happened to Cahokia. They know the real history. And in fact, it is our understanding that they use and tell this history. And one of the reasons is to teach their own people why you cannot go up against the gods, because this is what they will do. So it's a training tactic used, from what you found out, they're showing it as a hologram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're showing it as a hologram in their own teachings. And this is no different than saying in Christianity, like if you go against God, you're going to hell or you'll be smited. It's the same identical practice. And the ironic thing is, what the giants were letting me know was that the fact that this society fought back, they fueled the very enemy they were trying to get rid of. In any other normal circumstance, that revolt would have worked. But in this instance, they were comparing the past to the new disclosure movement. They were basically saying that some kind of revolution would empower this enemy enough to actually harm us. So this was a historical comparison that the giants were trying to make. You will see in this channeling that we did up on Monk's Mound.
Yeah, so this is the reason we were drawn here. This is the reason that, it started with my visions and then with your communications, starting with the giants or whatever. Mm-hmm. And we did not plan this trip, but why we were called to come to Cahokia Mounds, because it has, you should know the true history of it, but it has relevance to right now. So the goal, unfortunately, with these beings in domination and control, we've said it over and over and over again, and what we've learned here, from what we learned here, is that hate, anger, things wanting justice, and that hate and anger, that energy that comes forth from that within you is actually used as fuel. And if they can get enough people in revolution mindset and that hate and anger and that vengeful mindset, then all they're doing is setting stage for a larger Cahokia harvest. And they will stay in domination and control. And that's just what they're hoping for. So there has to be another way. And, as we say, stop feeding the beast. That you starve them out, you do not give them the fuel that they need, and the goal is to move forward now, but it's going to be, we're going to move it forward by people that are not going to take that old mindset, because it does nothing but provide them the energy they need to stay in control. So with that, we wanted to be able to kind of end this a little bit more. I know that you still have some channeling and some final thoughts. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to turn this over to Chris.
yes, before I do that channeling, you will see the video we did at Cahokia. So right now it is going to go to that. Okay, we are on top of Monk's Mound in Cahokia, and there are a group of giants here that wish to speak, but the catch is it's not going to be for very long. Since when we got here, these giants have had to dodge spheres and reptilians and the like here, and spindly beings. So they're forming a circle around us for probably a minute or so. So I got very little time in which to do this channeling. We can add information that we know at the end of this video. So here we go. I will get their leader. Greetings. You know me as Druden. We spoke on the show the other night. I must be brief in my time here in the land you call Cahokia. I had to protect many of the native peoples from stuff and information they did not yet understand. See, this ties right into your disclosure movement in your current day and age. The natives at the time knew there was an old enemy at the gates. This is why they formed walls and stockades to keep out prisoners and keep out assailants from the walls. If I sound hurried, this means there's very little time in which I can talk. In this particular instance, I must say that the spheres and the ones you call the spindly beings and their reptilian servants were here at Cahokia when the residents struck out against them, against my better judgment. Yes, I was here present, advising their leader on day-to-day workings of the society, which you know as Cahokia. In this particular time, I advised him not to strike out, but he thought it best to be able to protect his own people by using military tactics against the spindly beings. This was all for naught because of the fact that the spindly beings are energy sponges. This coincides with your disclosure movement of your modern day. It's just another incarnation, if you will. I must be brief, but I will say that other fellow giants aided them in the fight to try to protect them. They too were harvested. Yes, there were many people harvested, but many survived. Many ritual sacrifices took place at the hands of what you know as the Draco reptilians. There are people here that have been reported to be beheaded in a ritual sacrificial manner. This is not completely so because of the fact that these beings that were beheaded were reptilians themselves. They took off the hands because it was through the hands that the reptilians withdrew energy, very much like an energy vampire in this respect. There was also a mound full of women found. This is one of my dear sons' harems, you would call it. Not all the women escaped from here, however, and they were of varying cultures and backgrounds, as were some of the men that came to live in this area of varying cultures and backgrounds. This is why no one can actually pinpoint an actual history of the place. Not only that, there were temporal or time inversions taking place because of the invasion of the spheres and the spindly beings. They caused a scar in time in which people cannot judge the most accurate history of this area. However, your cabal had somewhat to do with this. They attempted to come back to this area through the Montauk Project, you would know as, and record what happened here. However, there was a wound formed because this event was unpreventable because of the fact that the residents of the area focused so heavily on the spindly being's death, they caused their own, and they caused a wound in time. Yes, certain thoughts can aid in wounds in time, and certain thoughts can aid in healing wounds in time. Remember this when you wish to go full bore militaristically into battle against the spindly beings and the reptilians. Let this be a lesson in society. Thank you. Okay, we are back now after you saw that video we did at Cahokia. So, to end this, I will do a channeling from Druden. He was a very giant you saw there at Cahokia Mounds speaking through me. So, I will let him through to finish up any final thoughts he has this evening. Good evening, everyone, or morning, or afternoon, or whenever you are viewing this channeling. My name is Druden, and I am what you would call a giant. In this particular instance, I must say that I will reiterate what I said earlier this day. Your disclosure movement that you covet is one half of a very old for and against trickery. This is not going to work as you had intended it to work. This particular lesson was learned by the Cahokia people when they went up against the very same bad guy, you would call. This particular instance, I must reiterate, and all of my people must reiterate, under any normal circumstance, you would be most likely allowed to free yourselves in any fashion you choose. But in this instance, I must insist, and my people must insist, that you live a balanced life. You work through your heart space. Most of all, this is a frequency these beings do not understand. They lost this centuries ago, if they ever had it at all. Proof is in the pudding, you would say, and these people have tormented mine for centuries. You will see instances where scared people have destroyed my people in various situations. Your Great Wall of China is one example. The history is not as claimed. The Chinese people at the time were actually up against my very own people that had degenerated to cannibalism and were fighting those very people over the lands that they coveted that were not even their own. They had forgotten their way. Other instances of giants being slaughtered would be by your Native American peoples thinking that we were demons and the like, even though some of us do follow that path, regrettably. Your own history is not what you think it is. This for and against system cannot stand, nor will it ever stand. One side of the argument must die, then the other side of the argument will inevitably die. If these beings do not have fuel to fuel their rage and their fire and their hatred, they will cease to exist, vanishing into a forgotten wind or whim of forgotten history. This is what I came to say this evening, except for the fact that the sights that are seen in, and not necessarily seen in Cahokia, the one with the very women that were found, one of my dear children, where this was his harem, you would call it. I mention this again because it was actually his body that was found within that mound. Not all of my children were giants, everyone. Not all children that come from us end up being giants. Some end up being normally sized humans, some end up being dwarves, some end up being just like us. It's a variation of genetics that is very unpredictable at best. My name is Druden, and I am what you call a giant. Thank you, and good evening, and good afternoon, or good morning, whichever you prefer. All right. He comes through strong, and he lifts off of me quickly. The reason there were slight hesitations in the channeling stream is because he's extremely emotional. That has a lot to do with how well the channeling comes through and how well we blend. He's very emotional because he was talking about his son and about what happened at Cahokia because he was there to witness the whole thing. He actually lives underneath the main mound there. He was hidden from the spheres. They didn't really see him because he and the others took off that were there, that were consulting us. When we wanted them to come back, they didn't come back until we were up on Monk's Mountain. But he lives underneath Monk's Mountain. I'm not sure how far down. It'd be like the equivalent to a basement to him. But he's actually a fairly large giant. He's somewhere between 20 and 30 feet, as far as I know. but he lives in what he would consider like a basement under Monk's Mound. He wanted people to know that. Not that he wants you to go looking, not that anybody would actually see him. I believe he's in a different density or in some different frequency layer. So people probably would not see him if they went down there. But that is where he lives. So I will conclude this now. We will conclude this for this evening. Thank you for watching this video that we painstakingly put together. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.